Good morning and welcome back to another edition of Master Your Finances, presented by Certified Wealth Management and Investment. I'm Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional located in Princeton, New Jersey. I can be reached through our website, which is www.cwmi.us, or you can call me directly at 609-716-4700. This week, very pleased to have with us Nick Goblirsch, who, after graduating with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1998 and deviating from his father and grandfather's careers as doctors, he felt design, radio, and video production was a solid long-term strategy. Unfortunately, like most artists, without the proper encouragement and guidance, he soon fell into a day job far away from his college education. However, his ambition carried him, and he excelled. Deep down, he knew that someday he would record influential audio and videos content that would capture the attention of others. Unfortunately, that time would have to wait. Fast forward 25 years after rising to the ranks of an HR corporate executive, a side project to produce instructional and promotional videos for a friend's business reignited that artistic passion for leaving a mark on the world with expressive media content. Following this, in January of 2015, he launched the Dependent Independent podcast, approaching his 40s with two small children. It was a perfect lazy excuse to not make new friends. He decided to use podcasting to reconnect with those around him when building new, meaningful relationships became so hard to do. Using simple storytelling with people with clear points of view, he was able to do so what was so easy to do in his childhood. He made friends that meant something. He rediscovered himself and made the decision that helping others find the same self-discovery through their authentic expression, expressive audio and video was calling. Over the past 5 years, he has worked with other creators and entrepreneurs to become their best self with their online media and launched Dependent Independent Broadcasters LLC as a side project in early 2019. He has since pursued a passion for house painting and founded I Heart Painting in 2019 as a solopreneur in South Jersey. He's been able to use an entire toolkit he's put together with Dependent Independent Productions and his experience with self-marketing and branding to build a different type of painting company where passion drives the final product rather than just hard work. With this year-long entrepreneurial launch from a 9-to-5 grind, still channels that artistic within to use the power of content to increase profits and opportunities during this challenged economy today. Yeah, wow. Nick, I know, man, I heard you speak at the podcasters convention we had. I guess it's been a little over a year now at this point, but I found it pretty amazing, your story. If you want to go back into a little bit in detail, you were a very successful HR executive.
Yes, I was.
And, what people subscribe to be success, so to speak, if you took out the balance sheet, it looked pretty good. But there's that other side of it, which I think a lot of us, and I'm a big believer in this personally, is that, success is not just the dollars that are coming in the door.
No.
It's how you feel about your life. And when you get up in the morning, you're excited to get out there and go do what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, most people find satisfaction in life, learn to understand those priorities, that the dollar sign is not the first priority. It can be kind of the product of what your passion is, but you don't want that to be your passion, so to speak, right? So what did you discover through that? And HR is interesting because HR actually involves dealing with a lot of other people too. So what did you learn through all that?
Well, one thing I learned is I prefer to be by myself. That's one thing I learned.
Okay.
It's what's so weird when you have a job, it's very different doing what I do now compared to what I did before. Is my day revolved around interacting with people and being very good at engaging and communicating with people, sending the right message, which is really, really important now. I know there's a lot of HR managers and HR teams out there that are being pushed and stressed by their company leaders because they have to design communications that make sense and speak to the employee, because now's not the time for mixed messages or spins. You have to really get down to the facts. The career I had as an HR person, I kind of fell into it by accident because it's not something I in studying art, it's the only career I think, at least at the time. Now art is very, very big now with the access to design applications and the ways people can create things. And when I was in school, we didn't have websites like Pinterest where you could see other artists and what they can do, and Instagram and all these visual mediums that you can see what other people do. The only art examples we had were what was in books, art history. If you went to a museum, if you walked around your town, sat in a coffee shop for 2 hours and looked at the paintings that were hanging on the walls that were sometimes way overpriced. But when I graduated college, it was odd because I think they created I was part of a liberal arts fine arts program. But I remember during my graduation, they actually made the announcement they were making graphic design and a major, which I thought, damn, I missed that. I missed the 4 years of that. That would have been great. And I looked into some internships and some things that I thought that would kind of tickle my fancy in regards to taking all the skills that I've learned and actually putting it into practice. I had sold some small art items, that paintings. I made my medium was sculpture. I designed things out of particle board because, one, it was cheap, and two, I could fit it in the back of my girlfriend's station wagon because I could just get a 5x8 piece and make whatever I wanted with it. But when I graduated, I went back to my summer job. I worked at a racetrack in Central Jersey and went online looking for jobs and saw some jobs that had said things like advertising and sales. And long story short, I spent 2 years doing door-to-door sales all across the country for one of these multi-level marketing companies. Promised you riches, showed you brochures with people driving Ferraris, and told you that you do all the hard work now, you don't have to do it later. And
yeah, right.
Majority of it was BS. When I mentioned my podcast, I did a whole series on those, kind of a 3-parter on that journey. And I've since actually reconnected with some people I work with that we're always good friends, but now we're outside of that muckety muck. I'm able to really build good relationships with these guys without having this kind of umbrella of the business teaching you what you should and shouldn't do. So 2000 was a pivotal point because I knew, one, I was terrible at sales. No one wanted to buy from me when I was knocking on doors. But what I was really good at is training people how to do that and building people's confidence. So I was always, not that it was a curse, but in the sales industry, I think looks are a lot of things. But most of the people that were not confident were those people that didn't quite fit, maybe, let's say, an aesthetic that you'd want walking up to your door and knocking on your door. So I was stuck with those guys and girls. So it made me humble knowing that looks aren't everything. Not that they were, but in that environment, some of the most successful people in my office were the 6'2" guys and the attractive women that went out and were confident in who they were. At least they appeared to be. But it was a great accomplishment for me to actually work with people and be a good student of what they were teaching me and then be able to teach others. But I knew in 2000 that wasn't for me. And I ended up just simply packing up my car. I was in Chicago at the time and moved in with my wife and her parents, which was great. I look back, when we mentioned my podcast is a personal journal. So if anyone's interested in learning any more detail about this story, feel free to go back and download my podcast. The time I spent there, my in-laws pushed me to get a job, just like anyone else. I wanted to impress my in-laws. None of my family felt that what I did door to door was legitimate. So then started the search of finding jobs that were legitimate. And my father-in-law was a plumber in Atlantic City, had a lot of experience in how things work there. And we were only about a 15-minute drive away. And I started commuting there and finally got a job as what they called an HR rep, where you would screen employee candidates. And in the sales job that I had, most of my job was not only training, but also trying to hire people. So you take people out, knock on doors for 8 hours. You get really good at having a conversation with somebody for 8 hours, really getting to know them. So I thought, if you were going to ask me to do an interview in 10 minutes, piece of cake, absolute piece of cake. So that's pretty much where my HR career started. And I've always been of the mindset, act as if, because I was a manager in the sales organization that I worked for. I acted like I was the manager, and people saw that. And I presented myself well. I communicated well, articulated myself well. I had good customer service. I was kind. I listened. And eventually that just started steamrolling into job after job after job, but always a job where I was sought out by someone and that it was always a step up. I can't remember any time in my career where I actually had to hunt for a job. It always led to how I put myself out there, led to someone saying something to someone saying, hey, this is a guy you want to hire. So when you mentioned before, Kurt, about success, and I feel I was excelling, is I was good at something that people saw. Now, there was a time in my life where I didn't believe them. There was a lot of self-learning and self-discovery over the last 5, 6 years. But back then, I just simply thought more money, my paycheck went up, my in-laws were happy with me, my wife was happy with me. And it was more responsibility because I got bored real easy if the challenge wasn't there. But that was great. And that went on for 2 decades. And then what started changing is, and really a pivotal point was the recession, when I spent my whole career being the guy that's there to help people. Like I mentioned, all those other HR managers that are doing right now. And I became the Grim Reaper for 3 years. So I worked for a large retailer that no longer exists, but during 2000, started in January 2008 and lasted up through beginning of 2012. When I got laid off, I was the guy. I was the guy organizing 100 people layoffs and had to be executed within 4 hours, and designing all the company communication and telling people that make twice as much as I did what to do, what to say. And I did it in the mindset of being as empathetic as I could, because I needed to understand that message sucks, because I remember the first time I gave that message, that was really difficult. But also asking someone that doesn't do it every day, because we had so many people to talk to at the same time, to be able to empathize and teach them how to say it. And again, it still scratched that itch of really enjoying how to, number one, connect with people in a way that would help them, but that teaching and training and guidance, which to me, that was satisfying to me. But once my skin got pretty thick through 2008, 9, and 10, I started doing some questioning of my long-term strategy for that career. Even though I was going up all the time, I started somewhat really behind the scenes saying, is this something I really want to do? Do I want to be that guy? Because I felt that my career, for doing something that long, I identified with that. You know, we all look at what we do and say, he's a carpenter, or he's a businessman, but are they really? Like, is that something who they are? And I didn't realize it till nearly 7, 8 years later, or 4 or 5 years later. It's just understanding that I didn't want something like that bad time to define me. And I knew it was going to happen again. And I knew my fate was I'd be sitting across from somebody another 15 years from now going through that same thing, because I was good at it, Kurt. You know, who wants to be good at that? But yet I looked at it thinking, you know what? I think I'm going to have to think of a different career path.
No, I agree. I mean, it sounds like you brought up an image of Norm at Cheers. I remember that episode where Norm was the person that had to go lay everybody off.
It's the worst and the best episode.
And he started off being the empathetic guy that went and took him out to lunch. But now later in the episode, they started talking about how everybody got traumatized when they found out that Norm was going to ask them out to lunch. So you just brought that image of, all of a sudden you had to be, and anytime somebody was going to talk to you, you went from being the guy that was hiring, and now you're the guy that has to kind of let them go. And I'm assuming that over a period of time that had to have an emotional stress on you, I would think. At least I know it with me.
I masked it off pretty well, Kurt. There were even articles that were being put out during that time of, what about the HR? Is anybody thinking about the HR person? But when you provide someone a job, you provide self-worth. And when you take a job away from someone, and again, at the time, it wasn't my decision. I eventually was put in those positions where I had to decide who came and who went. And I thought that was even, But again, I got good at it. And then being good at something no one else wants to do makes you marketable. And people will pay you for it.
Wow, Nick, I appreciate that. We're coming up on the break here. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We're going to be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Nick Goblirsch, and we just went through an amazing story of how his acceleration, learning a lot about sales to multi-level marketing, and that they use skill sets to transition into HR, had a very successful career, learned a lot about working with people and managing people, but that wasn't really your passion, right? What was your passion, Nick? You want to tell us about your passion and how you transitioned into that for us?
Well, I think creativity and creation was always something that even I spent much more time on in my corporate life than I did really sometimes even learning about and focusing too much on the balance sheet in the business is creating programs, anything from handbooks to intern programs to performance management programs to presentations. I always liked the way of taking images and content, and I even found a way to create my own training videos on platforms. And I found myself always really excited doing that and completely uh, oblivious to what was happening around me. That whole idea that when you do something you love to do, it's not like work. And
Right.
there were tidbits of that. So as I started doing some self reflection, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I started realizing that there are things that I like to do at work and things that I don't like to do at work. So how can I find opportunities at work or anywhere to do things I like to do? Because I don't want to be bored. I want to be engaged and I want to have fun doing what I'm doing. But where are those aspects? And I mentioned previously that the company I worked for no longer exists and it wasn't immune to what was happening in the market. And there was one individual, one friend of mine who I became friends with. He and I were both our wives were having kids at the same time. We both had interesting jobs that were stressful. His job was monitoring all the loss in the retail stores that the company owned, where he had to sit just like I did, had to terminate someone or lay someone off. He had to sit with people and have them confess of stealing $50,000 worth of apparel. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a soul sucking job as well. And we both had some common feelings about what we did. But he started scratching an entrepreneurial itch very early. And at the time, he was chasing a passion of starting a martial arts school. He was a Marine prior. I think when I was in college, he was a Marine. Started understanding about the physical form, anatomy, the body, staying fit. And he started chasing martial arts. So he flew out to Thailand to learn Thai kickboxing. Like
Oh
we're
my goodness.
talking in those. I mean, to work with masters there, not like in gyms like we have here in the States, like these
Mm-hmm.
dirty places where he would go toe to toe, full contact, literally toe to toe with these people. And I thought, man, this guy is just going way out of his way to do things I would never do. But yet he's doing it because he's chasing something and he enjoys doing it. And he had the support from his wife, and it was great. And I started getting an interest to what he was doing. And I remember a distinct conversation where he was telling me, Nick, I had left that job. I had been laid off from that company, and he eventually quit in his position to start his own martial arts business. He'd be doing it on the side in his basement, but he knew he needed to expand. And he said to me, Nick, I'm doing really well. I have an accountant. She's great. I have a lawyer. They're great. I finally have a space. But the one thing I don't have is like marketing. I don't have video. I know YouTube's getting pretty big and all this. And I dabbled in video production since I was in college. And I studied that. So I always had a camera lying around, and I said, "Hey, I could do videos for you," and that was a significant moment in my life because I, without hesitation, uh, never looked at offering that as something that would be work. It would be simply sharing something I knew how to do, and we spent about a year building his. One is making sure he was comfortable on camera, and two, making sure that the content he was providing looked good. I had to invest in a I had to invest in a new computer. I had to invest in a lot of stuff and software that I didn't have before that uh, eventually became part of my own toolkit.
Oh wow.
That I think, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think that uh, it was a gift to me because I was able to find out uh, what I was made of because I hadn't used some of that equipment until back when I was in school. So about every 2 weeks, I would drive to his studio about 45 minutes away, and I would go and record a video for him. He was not comfortable in front of the camera. So just like I trained all these people when I did sales on how to communicate and how to feel confident, I did the same thing with him 20 years later. And eventually he started putting out content, which led him to drive his own revenue. And that was fun to see. What wasn't fun was the fact that I was doing a lot of work and it was almost like a second job for me. And
Hmm.
I was doing it for a friend, but eventually I thought, you know what, I could probably do this and make some money. And he would push me to do that. And as I was kind of going through this evolution at work, realizing, is this the path I'm on? Suddenly I have my best friend who's an entrepreneur saying, hey, you should try this out. Maybe take on a few jobs on the side. And because my job and my HR career defined me, I thought, well, I can't do that. That's only going to take me away from what I do and excel at work.
Hmm.
But eventually, I came around and started diving in and really looking into that. The company I had currently worked for, or in 2017 and 18, was a very entrepreneurial company. So I would have a couple conversations with some of the people that work there and ask some questions, but still wasn't ready to jump. I had mentioned to my wife a few times that this wasn't something I felt I needed, or I wanted to do the rest of my life. But when you were making the money that I was making, it's not easy to walk up to your spouse and say, hey, by the way, I want to change this whole lifestyle because I'm not happy. Um, in the interim of doing this podcast, doing these videos for my friend, I'd listen to podcasts all the time. Over 8 years, I'm looking at it right now, my old iPod,
Hmm.
one or two, and during that time of the recession and all that, escaping and my long commutes was always something that was needed. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, and doing radio in college, I
How did that
realized,
conversation with your wife go? I mean, to me,
well, let
financial
me,
conversation with a
yeah,
spouse at any level is always one of the biggest stressors in a marriage.
sure.
And when you approach your spouse and say, "Hey, honey," I mean I'd be curious if you wouldn't mind sharing a little more about that, because that's one of the biggest fears I think a lot of people have when they want to make a change, whether they're going, especially when you're going from like a W-2 pretty secure position
Hmm.
into something that is really kind of out on a limb a little bit. And I think what you did was pretty smart, is you kind of stepped into it, right? You did the side jobs, and I think that's really smart
Well,
without giving up the other money. But you went from a very high level job, to really kind of out there. And that's a big jump initially down, and then you got to build yourself back up. So how
yeah.
did that whole conversation go?
Well, it wasn't by choice. In
Right.
2017, I would plant a lot of seeds with my wife because I'd come home knowing that and this was 2018. This was pre-life
Right.
crisis, you know, finding myself, that I had planted seeds with my wife, thinking that she would. I was almost looking for permission, Kurt, for her to
Okay.
say, "That's great. No, I know you're unhappy," but her family and how my mother-in-law and father-in-law being uh, public servants and my wife being a teacher, they sign up for a job that has a pension and it's long term and you get through it and you reap the rewards when you're done. I had never been that way. That's not in my DNA.
Hmm.
But I was confident, one, I could do things well if I put my mind to it. And two, if I give a good product and people will pay for it. And getting past that, if that was the other thing, Kurt, realizing that I could, asking for money was a big thing. I had done all that
Right.
work for my friend for free. So when I started, that took about 6 months to really understand, okay, this is what I'm going to charge people. But all this kind of happened all at once. In 2018, I spent a week-long cruise in Alaska, walking on glaciers and fishing for salmon with my family. And it had been the first time in years that I had ever been away from work, like literally disconnected from work because we had no cell phone service, but focused on my family. When I said my job defined me, when I was at home, I provided and I was present, but I wasn't really that present with my family. But I go on this trip and I suddenly start enjoying, really understanding what it means to enjoy company with your entire family. But I hadn't anticipated the amount of depression I would feel the moment the trip was done, because then I knew in my head I had to go back to where I didn't want to be, and that was really difficult. That was a tough time. That it wasn't so much of saying that you didn't want to do it anymore, because even the podcast and production services that I was providing, Kurt, that wasn't, when you tell your family that that's what you're going to do to put food on the table, they don't know what
Hmm.
that is. They have no idea.
Right.
And that's not, to me, it's truly not as legitimate as you might think. I mean, you and I know some powerhouses out there that make a living doing that, but they're in a different level. For me to do that, because my business model is simply making your content, you look better through your content, or you sound better through your content, leaning on
Right.
those coaching skills that I have. And I hit this bout of depression that overwhelmed the family. I mean, what killed me is I'm driving with my son, and my son looked at me and says, "Dad, why are you so unhappy?" And my son had never said that. And I communicate with my kids. And I needed to dig myself out of this hole. And my podcast reflected that at the time. So I started reaching out to business leaders and people that I knew, other entrepreneurs. I had asked over that whole year of entrepreneurs, how did you do it? How does it feel? And my wife would hear me having these conversations with these guys and girls, but I don't think she liked it because she knew it wasn't secure. And fast forward, after finding ways to cope with everything, I started digging myself out of this hole and realizing that I need to get out. I need to do something different. Well, in all that depression and all that anxiety, my work started suffering drastically. And between it's very hard for me, Kurt, to hide how I feel, even through my face. And my boss at the time, the CFO at my company, he had known me prior to this and knew me, even listened to my podcast. So he knew that I wasn't going to survive there at the company, and the environment was not ideal for me at any stretch. But it was just one of those environments that I knew years before that was just going to repeat itself over and over again. So luckily, to my to me, that they decided to lay me off at Christmas. So I was told about 2 weeks before Christmas that I was no longer needed there. And I'm telling you, it was one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me because it was a push in a direction. I knew I'd get some severance, but I knew I'd have to do something. I didn't know what it was going to be. Maybe it was podcast production, maybe it was something else, but not until after I was laid off and my wife really knew that I didn't want to do that anymore, that I didn't want to schedule any more interviews, that was where uh, the uh, shoe dropped, and that was when the fight began to find something that I could do to support my family and do it for me without forgetting that, but also do it that I could keep my family whole.
Wow, that's fantastic, man. Yeah, we're coming up on a break, but when we come right back, we're going to talk about now what you did next. It's amazing you figured out that that wasn't the right thing, and now you are happy. So let's find out what you did next. We'll be right back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I am Kurt here with Nick, and Nick, you went on from your HR career, starting a little podcasting on the side, which I think helped you a lot with your creative side, and it sounds like it helped you kind of work through almost like the mental health aspect of the
Yeah.
fact that your job was not exactly what you would like for it to be, so to speak. So it sounds like it was almost like therapy for you as far as creativity and helped you work out some of that. But ultimately, you figured out that even though you were kind of forced into the layoff situation and find a new job, it was actually a blessing in disguise. So once you were kind of given permission and your family was on board, so to speak, what did you do next? What was your next step?
The answer is nothing. So,
okay, fair enough.
so I get laid off in 2018, and a lot of sympathy from everyone, but it wasn't my first time getting laid off. I always knew, and I always appreciated seeing this. If you follow LinkedIn, no matter what, every time I've ever let someone go, they always end up on their feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always something I always knew in the back of my head. And then even through my career, how opportunities came to me as long as I worked hard and I kept moving forward. And in January of 2019, my wife realizing that I don't want to go back, there were a lot of difficult conversations that we had where I'm not sure it was misunderstanding or what if or between my wife and I, if I'm happy, is it the expense of her happiness? Which I one thing I really started getting into a lot more so was books on meditation, books on self-discovery, mindfulness. Spent a lot of time talking to people about those types of subjects. My podcast reflected that. I started reading a lot of books on understanding that the present is more important than the future. You can't predict the future. I started understanding where my anxiety came from, all the pressures I put on myself, and suddenly let the universe just do what it does. And things just started happening to me. So I would, there's no question that January 2nd, when New Year's was over, I was hustling on January 2nd, Kurt. I didn't stop doing
Mhm.
what I wanted to do. I didn't just sit around and watch TV all day. These were times that I worked, whether it be networking. I did some coaching on the side, which was great too, some business coaching. I met up with some entrepreneurs. I did as much networking as I possibly could. I guested on podcasts, any way to stay in the game. And then based on me sharing what I was doing, and again, the Dependent Independent Productions was an LLC at the time, and I thought, oh, it's going to blow up. It didn't quite blow up, but suddenly people were talking about me online. Someone would say, hey, I want to start a podcast. Who do I go to? Well, someone would recommend me on Facebook, and then boom, I'm doing a 4 episode launch of someone in Pennsylvania or someone in New York. But looking at that income coming in, it wasn't really something that was didn't seem that lucrative. I mean, it was almost shocking for the HR organization. I'm part of a local professional club, and I went there for the first time in February of 2019 as a podcast producer rather than an HR professional. As weird as it was for them, what was great about going there is that was the first time I went to one of those meetings that I was excited to talk about what I did. I
Oh, that's
hated
great.
I hated going to those things where I had to. So what do you? They come up to you. So how are things? And everybody's like, yeah, they're great. Well, no, it was awful today. It was terrible today. I got reamed up on my CEO for the most ridiculous reason. I couldn't. He said something absolutely inappropriate, and I couldn't call him on it. Like all these things that no one talked about. But it was exciting to be there. And months went by. I actually started doing. A friend of mine gave me some consulting hours. He needed some help in his office. He's a great friend of mine, and I still do that to this day. Help him out on the side. He needed some expertise, and I get to help him with some of the administration. But that was great. I mean, again, an opportunity that just came to me without me asking. So I started making money from this consulting job, and then I started making money for some small podcasting projects. In May of last year, I attended a networking event. We have a lot of wineries in the area where I live and a lot of breweries. And my finance guy at the time invited me for a networking event, a beer and wine tasting event. And I attended with a bunch of business cards in my pocket to promote my podcasting. There's a lot of business owners there. And I thought, great. It was an actual Chamber of Commerce networking event. So I'm handing these business cards out and trying to explain to people what I do. And it's always weird and not everyone needs a podcast. I think in this day and age, you need some online content, but not everybody should be behind a microphone and not everybody should be in front of a camera. But I'm kind of sitting across these two men chatting about construction. And this one man who I'd never met before says, painters are really hard to come by. I just bought a house. It's hard for me to find a good painter. And I don't know what it is, Kurt, but without hesitation, I looked at him and said, I paint. Now, I had mentioned painting during this whole time talking to you, but I had painted on the side since I was in high school. My wife had farmed me out to paint families' homes, nurseries, bedrooms, no matter what. Anytime someone said they needed a painter, I would offer to do it. To me, it was extra. It was something I was pretty good at, and it was something I wouldn't charge a lot of money for. Maybe I'd just say, feed me and give me a beer at the end of the day. That's fine. But this guy says, hey, it's a whole house. And at the moment I said yes to this guy, Kurt, I was automatically backpedaling. Like, I don't, yeah, it depends. It might not be that, I don't know. But I said yes, and I handed him my business card and said, if you're serious, just feel free to text me tomorrow. Now, whether there was part of me that thought he's not going to text me. This might be just a conversation we had and it goes away. But nope, he texted me. He wanted his whole house, a 2,600 square foot house, to be painted. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never priced anything like that before. But a fan of my podcast actually was a union painter, and he offered to help. And I said, what do I charge this guy? And this is what it looks like. And here are the pictures. And he gave me a price. I gave the guy a price. He said yes. I went back to my wife and said, honey, I'm going to paint this house. It's it's an extra $6,000 we'll make. This will be great. And I started doing it. I learned a lot from that one project. One is that I'm so out of shape. My arms would hurt so bad at the end of the day that I would have to lay like, oh God, I mean, I should have put Bengay all over my arms, but realized that sitting at a desk could definitely kill you if you don't work, you don't move around. But eventually the landlord who sold him that house, or not the landlord, the realtor, referred me to, or I painted some work for him, some spots in his house. And I went and did another thing. And I thought, you know what? I started a podcast business. Why can't I start a painting business? Let me work on a logo. Let me work on a name. I mentioned earlier in one of the other segments that if you do something that other people don't want to do, they'll pay you for it. So as I started telling people that I was interested in painting, and if they needed any help, they would say, well, I hate painting. So I thought, well, all right, cool.
I agree with that.
Name my company is I Heart Painting. So, because I love painting and you hate painting. So there you go. Yeah. And eventually I used all the chops I built with marketing my podcast and all the creativity that I had in school and at my HR career and all the customer service I had to start building this brand, this marketing brand. And in May is going to be one whole year. Now I never anticipated that I would be painting all the time. I didn't anticipate that it would be something almost similar to the podcasting where it'd be a side job and I'd still do the consulting, because deep down, my wife definitely felt that consulting piece was a solid, steady job. Even though it was do some work, send him an email, and get paid and invoice him for the hours. It was the same thing as being an entrepreneur. But we trusted. He's a family friend of ours, and we trusted him, and we knew that was steady whenever he needed me. I mean, today he reached out to me today for help. But as I started building my reputation on Instagram and Facebook, things started really blowing up, Kurt, like really blowing up. And you heard that at the conference. Sure. In September of last year, that I went from being this corporate guy sitting at a desk thinking that my world was already defined for me to now owning it and being able to do what I like to do every day, every day, no matter how hard it is, and be able to share that with the world visually, which I was able to do with Instagram's great. Facebook is a great platform. But I was just like I did with my friend's business. I use video as much as I possibly can to promote my own business too, and build that image and almost differentiate myself from other contractors, because there's a lot of painters out there. But right now, I don't know how their phones are ringing, but my phone's ringing every week, which is great.
I think you bring up something very interesting that we talk about a lot when we go in our nonprofit, try to talk to kids about good mental health and things like that. And not everybody needs to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or corporate guy. There's a lot of jobs out there. And I think we're all we're all noticing that right now, how, people that run grocery stores and truck drivers and a lot of this labor force out there is extremely necessary in our society. And I think a lot of times people look down at that. And I think that's absolutely incorrect. Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Because you've been on both sides of this.
Well,
what are your feelings about that?
I think, Kurt, has a lot to do with optics. You don't see people that, at least I'll speak for Gen Xers. Gen Ys. I'm a Gen Xer, so I knew when it was I didn't have a cell phone. I made payphone calls, and I sent resumes on parchment paper, folded in an envelope. But I think because social media and what's online is so accessible, you never see someone who has a YouTube channel in a modest home. You never see anyone with just modest means. And you only hear, back to your point when we started about success, of, so and such got a corporate job, or so and such got an accounting job, or so and such got this. Unless you're creating your own job, I don't think a lot of kids go to school they want to be picked up by big auditing firms, and they want $85,000 when they graduate. I was raised on the mindset, get a job in the mailroom. I earned every penny, Kurt, and I'll say that I worked my way up to show people that I was marketable and I was valuable. I did it I let people know outside before I realized it inside. but I think it's been quite some time in the making that I was able to help um, uh, people see that I could do X, Y, and Z, and I'm worth this much money. But I think kids today think that wearing cufflinks and wearing a sharp suit is a way to do that. And I felt the same way too. To your point, I always looked kind of somewhat down at blue collar. I thought, geez, that sucks, digging ditches all day. But when I realized there were times I would say at work, I'd rather be digging a ditch today than doing this, than sitting in a room for 2 hours getting hammered by somebody, verbally hammered by somebody, when I could be just outside working and doing that. That never happens now with what I do in my job now. I might have to deal with, like this week, I'm on a project that it took about 3 days for the customer to realize what color they needed. So I had to spend a little bit of money on samples. But other than that, those stresses aren't there. Now, I think they might feel that that's a safe bet when you think about mindfulness, and even way back when I tried to do something that I thought my in-laws would appreciate. I thought that would bring me peace, but it didn't. It didn't. It didn't bring me happiness. And why should I care what they think about what I do? I'm the one who has to show up every day. I mean, there was one point, I think, even with um, I guess it's doing what you have to do, doing versus what you want to do. Sometimes doing what you have to do is where you find the money. Doing what you want to do, right, Kurt? Oh, I want to be a gardener. Well, there's really not a lot of money there, but it might be happy. I remember there was
Right.
a conversation with my family when I finally decided, when they all realized I was going to be an entrepreneur or just do something very different than all of them, that I was told specifically that, well, you're supposed to be unhappy doing what you do at a job, and then you do what you're doing happy afterwards. I think
I have
someone
to
said,
disagree with that, but
I,
all right, Nick. We're coming up on a break here, Nick. Where you've been listening to my Master Your Finances. We'll be right back in a few minutes. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I am Kurt Baker here with Nick Goblirsch. And Nick, you're telling us a great story. You're working on a project right now, and you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
So, with everything that's going on, and thinking that I never knew my business would take off, it eventually did with everything, all the content I put out, and how I market my business. That once the pandemic really hit and people started realizing that we're going to start living differently. It's weird how, even though people reacted to me when I was deciding to be an entrepreneur, and a lot of it had been based on their own fears, where they'll tell me you're not going to be happy doing what you do, and and that just stemmed from them being unhappy, and or them telling me that you're supposed to be unhappy. Well, no, I'm happy, and I'm just going to do what I want to do, because decades I always did what I thought people wanted me to do, and I don't want it. That's not the way my life is going to be for the next umpteenth years, until I pass on and leave my legacy, truly leave my legacy behind. So I recall probably about a month and a half ago, my wife wakes me up, Kurt. She says, Nick, you got to get up. You should probably go out and buy all the paint you need. And I said, well, why do I have to do that? She said, well, I just saw this thing that they may shut down all the paint stores. And I said, I don't think they're going to do that. They can still sell paint. People need paint. Things are being painted. And I buy all my paint from a specific retailer that does curbside pickup, and I could go online and order my paint. So their business model is perfect. I don't need to go into the store anytime. They'll even deliver my paint at my house. So it got me thinking about, wow, this is cool. Like, look at that. My supply stream, or my supply chain, is not going to be interrupted by any of this, because they've already come up with a way to adapt to this. And as things started really changing and businesses started shutting their doors, especially service-based businesses and restaurants and things like that, I started getting a little concerned, but then realizing that my phone wasn't stopping ringing. It was still ringing. People were still reaching out to me. I still had jobs in the pipeline, and they hadn't reached out to me and said that we don't want you in our home. I think I'm at an advantage because I put myself out there. People see me, they see where I work, they know my family, they know who I am. And I think a lot of it is a level of trust. Someone called me yesterday and simply said, I know this person that could come in and do this job, but we'd rather hire you because we know you. And I think The recession taught a lot of companies that in order to stay relevant and bring back those customers, you better up your game in regards to customer loyalty and customer service. Because if I'm going to choose between two restaurants, even though they sell the same food, I'm going to go to some place that treats me way better, way, way better. And I think with this crisis, it's really going to teach people, and it's already teaching me, that in order to stay productive and stay profitable as much as you can during this time and even as it passes, is you have to stay relevant. If just and I say relevant is this is a lot of time for people to think. We have people that are home right now, even thinking about their own careers, right? People that are thinking and going, "Hey, wow, it's so much better." Just like I did when I was on this Alaskan cruise, Kurt. Someone's sitting in their living room right now, going, "All right, school work's over for the kids, and now we can just hang out, watch Netflix. This is time I've never done before. I don't have to sit in a boardroom all day. I can do most of my job virtually, which that's going to change really." An environment like that, how virtual people can communicate now. But people are going to definitely come out of this looking at the world different. I just think that I'm in a lucky place because even though I didn't have to go out and buy all my paint, I'm still being taken care of by that paint retailer that knows me by name and gives me what I need when I need it. I still communicate just like I did. I drafted an email communication and a text communication in order to get people to know what I did to prevent me bringing anything into their home. I wear a respirator most of the day. I put rubber gloves on the moment I get out of the car and don't take them off until the moment I leave. I make sure I don't come within a huge distance from anyone that's there. But the lucky thing about being me, Kurt, as a solopreneur painter, is I usually paint by myself. I'm painting a lot of empty spaces. I'm painting new homes. I'm painting houses that are about to be sold. I'm waiting for an estimate to come in of a house that's going to be rented. It's not, and the owners are in Florida. So I don't know. My accountant told me that I probably found a career that's now recession proof. There is a part of me that is guilty because most of my closest friends are struggling, but yet I'm not. I wish I could do more for them. There is part of me that says, when's that shoe going to drop? But that's just another way of me self-sabotaging and doing that. So I think now, as long as I continue to communicate and show where I'm working, I think my phone will ring. But also because I'm out there, again, building on all that branding, I'm not just some random, I'm a very, very different type of tradesman because I'm more of, they're hiring me. They're not just hiring. It's like sales. They're buying me. They're not buying what I'm selling. What I'm selling is just paint. I mean, I'm going to leave this call, Kurt, and I'm going to go back to work at this restaurant and paint. And it's interesting. There's still, the restaurant I'm working at is a local restaurant. They're still doing takeout, still trying to stay busy, but I'm working closely with one of the brothers of the owners that we're brainstorming. I'm not just painting. I get to think, how can we make this place look 10 times better when the doors open again? How do we upgrade this? How do we do that? It's really engaging. It's not just, it's a lot of
Are
fun.
they
I'm
having
not,
it? Because we just got these new guidelines out. I'm just kind of curious if the restaurants are talking about, like when restaurants reopen,
yep.
we may have to have, the social distancing and guidelines may change. Like the seating capacity may be
Yep.
altered based on, you can't put them whatever 2 or 3 feet apart. They might need to be 6 feet apart. Or I don't know if they've actually defined that quite yet, exactly what that means. But it sounds like when they do allow these restaurants to open up their dining rooms, that may look differently. So have they had these conversations? Any of the restaurants that you've been talking to,
Yeah.
as
So
far as how to maybe make some adjustments?
we just had it this morning. I think one of the brainstorms was, well, the weather's going to be nice out. Why not put two? They have tents they use for catering right out on their property, and put outdoor seating. They could seat more people on site, and to make up for the tables that aren't inside, and give people a better opportunity to get some fresh air. And but the trick is how you market it. Really, how do you make it look? I think people. The hard part, even going to the grocery store, Kurt, is you couldn't be more on point. Almost like a dog that's alert because a squirrel is walking outside. My dog specifically. You're saying things like, am I standing too close to that person? Is my mask on properly? How long is the wait going to be at line? Do they have what I'm looking for? It's things you never thought about thinking about. It's I think it's something that we're going to have to work really hard to get past. But I think people yearn for interaction. I think I can't wait till I could just go to the coffee shop and order a cup of coffee. Yeah, I think that's something that I'm very, very much looking forward to. Very, very much looking forward to. But people are just going to they're going to have to make do. They're going to have to adapt. My message when I started painting, it may be very different than now. My business, how it looked a year ago, looks different now. I think we all have to adapt and overcome. We'll figure it out, Kurt. We'll figure it out.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah. So what other businesses have you seen that have been like taking advantage of the shutdown? I guess the real estate market is one of the ones that I think is interesting because I know some of the realtors are telling me they're not allowed to like show the houses right now, and but I do have people under contract, and I deal with people that are buying homes as well, and it hasn't really slowed down as much as I thought it would, although it has slowed down some because some people don't want to go out and look for the houses. Any of the realtors giving you feedback on what they're seeing out there right now?
Well, I painted someone's house that just moved. I painted their house before they moved and then painted their new home. And they closed on schedule. They actually accelerated their scheduling date. But what they did was they had their meetings either virtually or between cars. So they sat in the parking lot and paper was passed back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Any meetings that they had to do virtually. It's amazing when the whole, what's that? Just the idea of invention about using technology to break obstacles, and people are finding ways to do it. You don't see a lot of people throwing their arms in the air at this point, at least from the people I'm interacting with, and saying it just can't be done because people want to continue to live. And yes, people want to buy a home. I did have one customer who their sale fell through, but it had a lot to do with what was happening in the home, I guess pre-inspection versus actually something that had to do with realtors. The individual I was mentioning before, the brother of the owners of the restaurant that I've been working with closely, no, he's working. He's a real estate agent. He's working. He's in his office. People want to just hold on to as much as they can to live, and I enjoy seeing that. I want people to see that as I paint. Even when I have challenges, I want to capture a lot of momentum because, like the recession, a lot of people lost businesses because they didn't maintain some type of innovative momentum, and it's going to hurt. And I hope this stimulus definitely moves that momentum in some way, shape, or form. But if you stop living, you die. And I think whether it be your business or your social life at home or time with your family, if you stop doing it, it's just not. It'll end. It'll end.
I agree 100%. Well, Nick, this has been an amazing journey, and I think you bring up a lot of very valid points that I've noticed. I mean, technology, some of this stuff that a lot of us have known about and maybe used a little bit, are kind of being forced into using it more and more. And I think a lot of us are being forced into an educational cycle where we may find ways to really do things better, only because we've been forced into it. And I think you're right. A lot of people are probably sitting at home wondering, what I'm doing for a living, is this really what I like to do? Because I kind of like what I'm doing now a little bit better. There's some positives to being able to be around your family and so forth. So I think a lot of introspective things are going on right now. And I agree with you 100%. I'm a big believer in making sure you prioritize what you love to do over, because the money will follow. If you really enjoy what you're doing and do it well, and you point out something I think is very critical, especially for people who are in the trades, is you do have to have some type of managerial aspect to it. You can be the best painter in the world, but if people don't trust that you're going to show up on time and let them know what's going on, that's what I've always found to be kind of a little bit of a frustration. Sometimes you find somebody's really good at what they do, but then when you're trying to schedule things, sometimes they're just not doing that part of it. So you have to kind of you have to kind of do a little bit of those things as well. But you don't have to spend your whole life doing them. And I think right now we've all are very appreciative of the people who are out there mowing the lawn and driving the trucks and loading the groceries and all these things that sometimes, the rest of society, the white collar, tends to look down on, which they really shouldn't be. Do you have any last thoughts about what we should be doing right now?
Two things. One is, if you're doing something now that you're unhappy doing, it's okay if you choose to do something else. You'll be okay. The other piece is doing anything. If you think that pursuing a career where you get a steady paycheck is going to be easier than putting yourself out there and trying to start a business, nope, it's both hard work. Either way, I'd rather do hard work and be happy doing it than hard work and hating it, no matter where it is. And don't let fear, really, really don't let any personal fear keep you from doing what you love to do, no matter what. No matter what. being able to celebrate a year anniversary and starting my business a year ago, and reliving all those conversations that people would tell me, even people close to me saying, "You sure you want to do this the rest of your life?" The idea that I can do it now, and people know me, Kurt. People know who I am. They speak about my business. They speak about me just because I didn't stop. So I didn't let fear stop me, and I don't.
Well, that's excellent, Nick. You've done an amazing job, and I'm very happy to see that you're happy in what you're doing, and you're basically going after your passion, and I think that is amazing. Thanks very much for sharing some time with us today. You've been listening to Master Your Finances. Again, I'm Kurt Baker. We can be reached through the website where you can listen to the podcast at masteryourfinances.us. And remember, together we can master your finances so you can enjoy financial peace of mind.